Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to step away from this area. The words land sharp and controlled, polished like the crystal chandeliers above the ballroom, and every nearby head pretends not to listen, while absolutely listening. The wedding band trails off into a polite silence between songs. Waiters hover mid-step with trays of champagne, and under the warm gold wash of the lights, Dr. Elaine Carter stands exactly where she is, her hands relaxed at her sides, her chin steady, her posture calm in a way that makes the room more uncomfortable than if she had protested. The wedding planner's smile is tight enough to hurt. "This section is for family and honored guests only," she adds, softer but colder, as if kindness were something that needed to be rationed. A few people at the nearest table exchange glances, the kind that say everything without saying anything. Someone whispers that they don't recognize her. Someone else suggests she must have wandered in from the hotel lobby. Elaine doesn't correct anyone. She simply nods once, as if acknowledging a fact the room has not yet earned the language to understand. In the distance, the groom laughs with his friends, unaware of the quiet storm at the ballroom's edge. The scent of roasted herbs and warm bread drifts from the kitchen corridor. The clock above the service door reads 5:42 p.m., and in exactly 78 minutes, the first course is supposed to reach 200 guests, with the kind of precision that looks effortless from the outside. If you believe dignity matters, and stories like this deserve to be heard, I'd be grateful if you'd stay with me for a moment. The narrator's voice settles gently between breaths, not rushing, not pleading, just holding space. And when this part of the evening grows still, we'll return to where it truly began. The planner gestures toward the carpeted walkway that leads back toward the general seating area. "I'll have someone help you find your assigned table," she says, as if guidance were a form of containment. Elaine's eyes travel, not around but through, the ballroom, the narrow aisle the servers will use to weave between chairs, the gap too tight near the cake stand, the band's cables placed half a step into the service path, the way two waiters are already compensating for it without realizing they're doing so. She notices the kitchen door swinging too fast on its hinge and the slight nervous rhythm in a young server's hands as he steadies a silver tray. She says nothing, but something in her stillness unsettles the planner more than defiance would have. "You're making the staff nervous," the planner murmurs, a hint of embarrassment wrapped around authority. "This is a high-profile event. We can't have disruptions." A violin string warms again, tentative, like a breath someone hasn't decided to release. Elaine offers a small, measured smile. "I understand," she replies, her voice low, warm, undeniably human. The word lands gently, but it lingers. Behind the ballroom doors, a metallic clatter echoes from the kitchen, faint, but sharp enough for someone who knows the sound to feel it in the chest before the ears. A chef's voice rises, muffled and clipped. The scent of something cooling too quickly replaces the earlier warmth. A waiter glances up at the clock again. 5:44. The planner doesn't notice. She is too busy making the moment smaller than it is, shrinking it into etiquette and protocol. "It's a lovely evening," Elaine says softly, and for an instant the planner hesitates, because there's no challenge in the woman's tone, no sarcasm, no demand. Only truth, spoken without ornament. The witnesses around them multiply by the second. A bridesmaid pretending to fix her bracelet while watching. A photographer lowering his camera but not turning it off. An older couple whispering about seats and lists, and who belongs where. Someone clears their throat, meaning to interrupt but deciding not to. "Do you have an invitation?" the planner asks, though the question sounds less about paper than about permission. Elaine tilts her head slightly, as if listening to something beneath the music. Another small sound from the kitchen, not panic, not yet, but friction, a rhythm out of place. "I'm here at the groom's request," she says gently. "I didn't want to disturb the schedule." The planner's expression tightens at the word schedule, a word that lives at the center of her spine. "Then I'll confirm with him," she says quickly, eager to regain control she doesn't realize she's already lost. She steps away, heels clicking across marble, leaving behind an invisible circle of silence that nobody knows how to fill. Elaine remains where she is, and the silence does what silence always does when someone refuses to shrink. It reveals everyone else. A young server passes, his posture careful, his eyes wide when he sees her. He hesitates a fraction of a second too long. the way someone does when they recognize a voice they've only heard through a screen or a handbook or a story told during training. He almost speaks, then looks down, then exhales. In the reflection of a polished column, Elaine watches the kitchen door swing open just long enough to glimpse a row of plates shifting dangerously close to the edge of a prep table. The compressor hum stutters, a fragile heartbeat in a room that prides itself on never showing one. 5:47. Somewhere across the ballroom, a guest laughs a little too loudly, filling space that doesn't belong to them. The planner returns, chest tight with performance. "The groom is busy preparing for the first dance," she announces. "Until we verify, I need you seated elsewhere." Her voice is firmer now, like she is reminding herself she is in charge. "Of course," Elaine replies, and the ease in her answer catches the planner off guard. There is no resistance in it, only grace, which is far more disarming. She turns toward the path indicated, and as she moves, she adjusts by half a step to avoid the uneven section in the carpet near the champagne tower, the same place 3 servers had already stumbled without understanding why. The musician at the piano watches this tiny detour, his fingers hovering above the keys, as if the air itself had shifted. The planner notices, but misunderstands, like most people do when they've built their power on assumption. A bridesmaid leans toward another. "Who is she?" she whispers. The other woman shrugs, but her eyes linger. When Elaine reaches the corner of the ballroom, she pauses, not to resist, not to linger, but because the kitchen door opens again. This time the sound is clearer, trays being rearranged too quickly, a voice giving instructions in the wrong order. A young sous chef moves with frantic precision, trying to fix a problem he hasn't yet named. The air carries the faint, metallic chill of something that should not be cold. 5:49. Elaine closes her eyes for half a breath, the way someone does when memory and present moment fold into one another. She remembers a hallway like this one years ago, when the stakes were smaller, but the lessons were not. She opens them again, and the world steadies. A waiter brushes past, nearly colliding with a floral arrangement. Elaine shifts slightly, preventing the crash without drawing attention to herself. The waiter turns, startled, and their eyes meet for the briefest instant. Recognition flickers, not of her face, but of a way of standing, a way of breathing when everything depends on stillness. He swallows, nods, and continues. The planner, now reassured by her own narrative, lifts her chin. "Thank you for cooperating," she says, as if the word were a ribbon she could tie around the moment to make it pretty. Elaine smiles again, warm, unwavering, and in that smile lives the quiet truth the room will discover too late, that some people do not need to raise their voice to change the temperature of a night. They only need to remain exactly where they are until the truth has no choice but to walk toward them. The piano drifts into a softer melody as the ballroom settles back into its polished rhythm, but somewhere beneath the music and laughter, the night carries a faint tremor that only Elaine seems to hear, and as she moves toward the outer tables, the world around her blurs into a tapestry of light and movement that folds gently into memory, the kind that doesn't arrive as nostalgia, but as something stitched quietly into the muscles and breath. Years earlier, before titles and conference stages and the language people use when they are trying very hard to sound important, there had been a smaller dining room with scuffed floor tiles and a ceiling fan that rattled when the summer heat refused to let go, a place where the night shift carried exhaustion like a second skin, and the kitchen door never closed all the way because the hinge refused to surrender. Elaine was younger then, still learning how to stand still when tempers rose, still discovering that leadership, real leadership, had less to do with voice and more to do with presence. On one evening like that, a server named Luis dropped 3 plates in a row because his hands wouldn't stop shaking after a double shift, and before the manager could turn frustration into something sharp and permanent, Elaine stepped between them, not to protect or to scold, but to breathe, slow and grounded, until the room remembered itself. That night she stayed late after closing, drawing a rough diagram on a napkin, a service path that curved rather than cut corners, a station rotation that honored the body instead of daring it to fail. And she didn't know then that napkin would become a training module, would become a set of practices whispered across kitchens and ballrooms and banquet halls, passed from hand to hand without anyone ever asking where it came from. Back in the present, as the chandeliers scatter warm light across polished glass, a young waiter brushes by Elaine again, and this time he pauses just long enough to speak under his breath, his voice careful, reverent, like he is reciting a line from a book that changed his life even though he never saw the author's name. "Bend with the room before the room bends you," he murmurs, not looking up, as if repeating a prayer. Elaine's chest tightens with recognition. Not pride, not ownership, but a quiet ache reserved for the strange distance between the work we leave behind and the people who inherit it. "Where did you hear that?" the bridesmaid beside him asks, curious. He shrugs. Training orientation. They said it was from an old handbook. No one knows who wrote it. The planner overhears and waves the words away like dust in a perfect space that doesn't allow for origin stories, and yet the seed has already been planted, small and patient, waiting. The ballroom doors swing again, and a gust of cooler air carries with it the metallic echo of trays resetting too fast. The clock above the kitchen reads 6:03 now, and the first course is scheduled for 6:20. And even without seeing the ticket printer spitting orders out of sequence, Elaine knows the feeling of a team running ahead of its own breath. She turns slightly and catches the eye of a young woman at the water station, a trainee no older than 20, whose jaw tightens every time a supervisor passes too close. The girl steadies a tray, inhales, and then, almost unconsciously, adjusts her stance, shifting weight the exact way Elaine once taught in a room with flickering fluorescent lights. Knees soft, shoulders loose, tray aligned with the center of gravity instead of the wrist. The motion is clean, graceful, learned from somewhere she cannot name. Someone at the table near Elaine complains about cold bread. Someone else glances toward the kitchen and sighs with the casual authority of people who have never seen a service fall apart from the inside. "We should tell management to speed things up," a guest mutters, not unkindly, just unaware. Elaine's gaze softens. Speed is never the problem, she thinks. It's the fear of failing in front of people who will never see how hard you tried. A whisper travels through the staff, not gossip, not panic, more like a shared code among people who know the difference between complicated and fragile. The sous chef appears at the door, eyes alert, calculating seconds. His lips move around a silent count. He recognizes Elaine now, not as a woman out of place, but as a shape from a story he once heard during his apprenticeship, a mentor of a mentor whose methods were old school but kind, the kind of myth kitchens build when they need to remember that dignity can live in efficiency. His hand hovers on the door, then retreats, because respect keeps him from asking too much. Elaine feels the quiet plea anyway. She doesn't step in. She doesn't command or rescue or center herself in the story. Instead, she lets the memory of that rattling ceiling fan and that trembling server steady her breath. She notices the gaps in the dance of the room, the narrow curve near the ice buckets, the collision point where two service lanes cross like railroad tracks. And she knows why things are unraveling. Not negligence, not incompetence, but design inherited from people who never worked inside their own blueprints. The planner strides past, adjusting a table card, satisfied with symmetry and unaware of the fault line beneath it. "Everything is under control," she says to no one in particular, and the words fall to the floor like fragile glass. Elaine stops beside a tall arrangement of white lilies, her fingers grazing the edge of the tablecloth to keep it from catching on a passing chair, a small intervention invisible to everyone except the one busser who sees and blinks in gratitude. He recognizes that gesture too, not the woman, but the way of noticing. He bows his head slightly and returns to work with calmer shoulders. The pianist shifts into a slower tune, as if the room itself is learning to breathe. Through the half-open kitchen door, the pulse of the crisis beats on. Orders rearranged, a compressor struggling, the unspoken fear that the evening might collapse before it even begins. Elaine remembers a night years ago when a storm knocked out power mid-service, and she gathered the staff in a narrow hallway and said gently, "Service is not the food. Service is people moving together through uncertainty." The phrase spread the way warmth does, carried in pockets and notebooks, retold by cooks and servers until it no longer belonged to her at all. Here, now, in this ballroom, she hears a fragment of it echoed in a soft voice from somewhere near the bar. "We move together," a server whispers to another as they time their steps, and the words thread themselves into the evening like a promise. The planner glances back at Elaine once more, unsettled because nothing outwardly dramatic has happened. No confrontation, no defiance, and yet the room feels inexplicably changed, as if the music found a deeper key. The clock shifts to 6:07. A staff member at the far end of the hall subtly mirrors Elaine's posture, grounding himself, and the nervous tremor in his hands steadies just enough that the tray he carries stops rattling. He doesn't know why it worked. He doesn't know whose wisdom he is borrowing through muscle memory and borrowed language. But he knows this. In a night that will measure success by applause and photographs, the real miracle is happening here, in the narrow quiet between panic and grace. Elaine turns slightly toward the kitchen door, and though she still hasn't crossed its threshold, it has already begun to open toward her. The clock above the service door rolls quietly to 6:14, the brass hands glinting beneath the chandelier light, and the room hums with the kind of polite anticipation that only exists when no one in the crowd realizes how close an evening is to unraveling. The band moves into a brighter melody to mask the unease, champagne flutes clink softly, and the wedding planner glides through the center aisle with a smile so polished it feels less like warmth and more like armor. "We're moving into the introductions in 5 minutes, she announces to a nearby staff member, her voice brisk, almost brittle. "Make sure all service traffic clears the dance floor." Her tone carries the authority of someone who believes order is created by sheer will. Behind the kitchen door, however, there is no room for illusion. A faint hiss, and then a dull thud ripple through the metal frame. Not loud enough to alarm the guests, but unmistakable to anyone who has lived a lifetime among trays and burners and engines that choose the worst possible moment to fail. The sous chef's voice surfaces in fragments, controlled but urgent. A refrigeration unit has dropped temperature faster than it should. A cart of plated starters has begun to sweat. Somewhere, a timer beeps, like an anxious heartbeat. Is 6:15. A young runner hurries past Elaine, his cheeks flushed, his breath sharp from suppressing panic, and in his hands he carries a stack of folded linens, meant to hide the growing signs of a kitchen on the verge of falling behind. He almost collides with a violinist adjusting his bow. Elaine shifts a hair's breadth to the right, and the collision transforms into a near miss no one else notices. The runner pauses, startled, then nods an instinctive thank you, as if acknowledging an invisible hand guiding him through chaos. The planner sees the moment but interprets it as confirmation of what she already believes, that she is in control, that the night is bending to her choreography, and she lifts her chin a little higher, reassuring herself with the shape of authority, rather than the substance of it. The witnesses multiply the way they always do when tension walks into a room, wearing silence instead of sound. A photographer angles himself toward the dance floor, but his lens keeps drifting back to the edges, to the quiet corners where staff move like tides, adjusting, compensating, holding back disaster with grace that will never make it into any speech tonight. A small group of wedding guests near the bar comment idly about pacing, about service delays and efficiency, the way people do when they mistake patience for entitlement, and time for something that belongs to them by default. One woman checks her watch. Another lifts an eyebrow. Nobody sees the knot tightening behind the kitchen door. Elaine hears it. She hears it in the shift of footsteps, in the accelerated rhythm of servers who have begun to move not with trust, but with fear of being blamed if the room discovers its own fragility. She has seen this pattern unfold in more places than she can count, the point where anxiety spreads faster than instruction, where even the most skilled hands forget their training because the air itself has turned into a test. She steps a little closer to the threshold, not crossing it, not announcing herself, simply aligning her breath with the room the way she once taught others to do in moments just like this. "Miss, you really can't stand there," the planner says, appearing again, sharper now, less courteous. Her voice trembles beneath the performance. "This is a restricted zone. You're distracting my staff." Elaine's gaze softens. "They're already distracted," she replies gently, and the planner stiffens at the implication, not of blame, but of truth spoken too plainly for comfort. The pianist's music dips for a fraction of a second, as if sensing a draft of unease pass through. 6:17. A tray skims too close to a guest's shoulder. A server corrects himself mid-step. A glass trembles, then steadies. The planner turns, ready to issue another instruction, when the kitchen door swings wide for a brief, unguarded moment. A wave of chilled air rolls outward. 3 ornate plates sit under cloche near the threshold, condensation gathering where it does not belong, and the sous chef stands frozen for half a breath, calculating whether he has enough time to refire or enough dignity left to gamble. His eyes lift, not toward the planner, not toward the manager, but toward Elaine. Recognition is not about identity, it is about language. He sees in her posture the shape of a lesson he once heard in a late-night prep room. When you cannot slow time, you steady people. He swallows. He hesitates. A choice hovers. "We're fine," the planner calls toward him, as if volume alone could resolve logistics. "Stick to the schedule." The sous chef nods because the hierarchy requires it, but something in his shoulders says otherwise. A busser in the hallway whispers to another, "If this backs up another 5 minutes, we'll hit the procession." The other nods, voice barely audible. "We'll get blamed either way." The words settle into the room like dust no one wants to claim. Elaine steps half a pace back into the margin of space where people pass without acknowledging that everything depends on their passing. She doesn't command, doesn't intervene, doesn't announce what she knows. She simply speaks to the runner beside her, barely above a whisper. "Breathe with the turn." The young man startles, because the phrase lives not in conversation but in the opening page of a training manual he once studied with trembling hands. The same phrase a mentor told him came from a woman who believed kitchens were made of people, not doors. He exhales. His grip steadies. His route adjusts by instinct. 6:18. The photographer lowers his camera again, eyebrows knitting as he senses the shift. The band waits for a cue that hasn't arrived. Guests gather near the floor, clapping softly at nothing in particular, filling space with anticipation. The planner straightens a boutonniere, forcing confidence into the seams of her voice. "We're right on time," she insists to a bridesmaid, who smiles because that is what bridesmaids are trained to do, reflect reassurance, even when they don't believe it. The sous chef appears at the doorway once more, a thin line of resolve across his face. He leans toward the service captain, speaking in code. "We can hold course, but we'll burn trust." The captain closes his eyes briefly, weighing damage like currency. Before he can decide, a young server, the same one who whispered earlier, turns toward Elaine with a courage he doesn't realize he possesses, and says quietly, "Ma'am, were you the one who wrote the Carter rotation?" The planner freezes. The name hangs in the air like a bell struck in a cathedral. A hush ripples through the staff clustered near the door. The sous chef blinks once, then twice. Someone exhales in a way that sounds like relief, disguised as disbelief. Elaine doesn't answer right away. She doesn't need to. The truth reveals itself in the way the room tilts, not toward her, but toward memory, toward a lineage of unseen hands that shaped the way these people have been surviving nights, exactly like this one. "We studied it," the server continues, voice trembling not with fear but with something close to reverence. "First week, they said the person who created it believed no one should break themselves to keep a room beautiful." The planner opens her mouth to dismiss the moment, to reclaim command, but the words do not come. Because in this instant every witness, staff, musician, photographer, even a few guests who can feel the energy shift without understanding why, knows that authority has changed location. Not power, not ownership, but moral gravity. The sous chef steps fully into the doorway now, and for the first time all evening, he lets the truth enter the room. "We're at risk," he says calmly, professionally, without shame. "Not of failure, of harm." The planner inhales too quickly. "We cannot derail the schedule." The captain shakes his head slowly. "We can't sacrifice people." 6:19. The first announcement is seconds away. The ballroom breathes in, and in the small space between expectation and collapse, someone, it is unclear who, turns toward Elaine not as a savior, not as a symbol, but as a witness who understands the cost of pretending everything is fine when it isn't. She meets their gaze with the same quiet steadiness she brought into every room that ever tried to hide its fractures. She doesn't step forward. She doesn't raise her voice. She simply nods once. An invitation, a permission, a remembering. And in that fragile moment, before the music swells and the doors open wider, the staff begins to move together. Not faster, Not louder, but truer, as if the night itself has finally decided to choose dignity over performance. The band cues the opening chord for the wedding party entrance just as the ballroom doors begin to glide inward, and for a fleeting, impossible moment, it feels as if the night might hold itself together purely through the force of ritual. But the illusion fractures the instant a server rounds the corner too quickly, his tray tilting, a cascade of cutlery rattling like bones against china, before settling into an uneasy silence that stretches further than any sound could. Guests glance over their shoulders, the planner's smile tightens until it looks carved, and the staff move faster than their breath can follow, chasing a clock that refuses to slow. 6:22. The first course should already be in staging. In the kitchen, the compressor coughs once more, a subtle failure disguised as machinery doing its best, and the sous chef runs numbers in his head. Temperature drop, re-chill time, garnish integrity, all while the service captain counts servers, paths, obstacles, calculating where dignity will be most likely to break. The planner steps between them, voice sharpened to a blade. We proceed. No changes. If we start improvising now, we'll lose control of the room. Her words land not as leadership, but as a verdict. Elaine stands near the threshold, watching a young runner brace himself against a doorframe as if steadying the building from the inside. She doesn't move forward. She doesn't retreat. Instead, she holds a stillness that feels like the opposite of surrender, the kind that offers space for truth to speak even when no one wants to hear it. The first pair of bridesmaids begin their walk to applause, and the ballroom blooms with delight that has no idea it is balanced on the edge of collapse. The planner inhales and exhales like someone trying to will gravity into obedience. Move the carts now, she hisses toward the captain. I want that first wave staged beside the arch when the bride enters. The captain opens his mouth to warn her, but obedience arrives faster than courage. Two servers push the cart toward the tight curve near the champagne tower, the same curve Elaine noticed earlier, the one built for aesthetics rather than human movement, and the wheel catches the edge of the uneven carpet, just enough to twist momentum into threat. Time does not slow in moments like this. It sharpens. The cart lurches, plates slide, hands scramble. A waiter lunges to save what he can, and in doing so puts his wrist beneath the full weight of porcelain and metal. The sound is small, a muted thud, a breath bitten back, but the pain radiates outward like a secret the room is now complicit in. He does not cry out. He does not stop. He does what service workers have been trained for generations to do. He absorbs harm so that beauty may remain uninterrupted. Blood does not spill, no spectacle to justify intervention, only a tremor in his fingers as he lifts the tray again. Elaine sees it, the angle of his arm, the subtle guarding of injury, and something inside her folds inward. Not in anger, not in shock, but in recognition of a familiar cost paid too often by people whose names will never be spoken into microphones. The planner notices only the plates that stayed upright. Good recovery, she says briskly, as if praise could replace accountability. 6:24. The bride appears at the top of the stairs, radiant and breathless, the room erupting into applause that swallows the kitchen's pain whole. The servers tighten formation. The captain signals a rotation he doesn't believe in. The sous chef knows the cold has gone too far now, textures shifting, sauces tightening, flavors turning into apologies, and he whispers, "We need to reset." But the planner shakes her head, eyes blazing with fear disguised as authority. "We cannot embarrass this family. Do you understand?" Someone whispers back, "At what cost?" The question vanishes into the music. Elaine takes a half step closer, not into command, but into witness. And suddenly, she is no longer in a ballroom. She is standing in that small dining room years ago, where a dishwasher worked through a fever because he could not afford to call out, where a server hid a sprained ankle inside a polished gate because every limp was labeled unprofessional, where excellence was purchased with silence and bruises shaped like expectations. She hears her father's voice from long ago, memory threading itself through the present. Dignity is not what you receive when others approve of you. Dignity is what you refuse to trade away, even when approval is easier. The server with the injured wrist falters mid-step. A glass tilts. A guest gasps. The planner's head snaps toward him with the kind of attention that arrives only when mistakes threaten reputation. "Switch him out," she orders, but there is no one to switch. every hand already stretched to capacity. The captain looks at Elaine without meaning to, as if his instincts have reached back to the source of the language he's been using for years. She meets his gaze. She does not nod this time. She does not encourage. She lets the silence ask the question he's been afraid to speak aloud. Whose safety is this room allowed to ignore? The announcement cue arrives. The groom takes his first step toward the center of the floor. The world narrows to applause and light, and a choreography that exists only from the guest's perspective. 6:26. The injured server swallows hard, lifts the tray again, and the tremor deepens into something that will turn into damage if it is allowed to continue. He closes his eyes for a heartbeat, and in that breath, his training returns, not as obedience to a schedule, but as allegiance to his own humanity. "Captain," he whispers, voice breaking but steady, "I can't safely carry this." The words are quiet, almost reverent, like a confession that could cost him everything. The planner spins, outrage flaring like a match. "You most certainly can. We do not fall apart in front of guests." The captain raises a hand, small, brave, shaking. "He's not falling apart," he says, and the entire service corridor stills, because no one expects him to say what he says next. He's telling the truth. The sous chef exhales a breath he has been holding for months. The busser who witnessed the injury sets his tray down, not defiant, simply present. The staff's eyes shift, not toward revolt, but toward alignment. A quiet, collective recognition that there are moments when the only professional act left is refusal. The planner's mouth opens, then closes, fury colliding with fear. "If this fails, it will be on all of you," she says, her voice shaking. "On your evaluations, your records, your—" She stops because even she can hear how small the threat sounds, now that the stakes have been named out loud. Elaine feels the lowest point crest over the room. Not drama, not spectacle, but an aching awareness that they are seconds away from choosing between appearance and integrity. The band swells for the couple's entrance. The bride glides forward with radiant joy. The guests rise to their feet, applauding a love story that knows nothing of the struggle unfolding just beyond their sightline. 6:28. A hairline crack runs through the planner's certainty. The injured server lowers his tray. His breath steadies. And for the first time all evening, the room does not punish truth. It simply pauses. The captain turns to Elaine again, not for rescue, but for witness, because he understands now what her stillness has been asking them to remember, that no evening, no ritual, no curated moment deserves the body of another person as collateral. The planner's hands tremble. She looks from the staff to the bride, to the immaculate arch of flowers and back again, caught in the brutal space between what she promised and what is right. For a terrible second it seems she will double down, that she will choose order over compassion, but the crisis has already begun to write its lesson into the bones of the room, and even she cannot ignore it anymore. "Hold service," the captain says, voice low but unwavering, and though the words sound like failure to anyone who worships perfection, to those who live behind doors that swing on fragile hinges, they sound like mercy. The planner closes her eyes, and the world tilts, power slipping from control into accountability. And this, here, in the thin breath before consequence and revelation, is where the night reaches its lowest point. Not because everything breaks, but because everyone finally sees what it costs to keep pretending it hasn't. The applause for the couple's entrance lingers in the air like a bright curtain that separates two worlds. One glittering and unaware, the other suspended in a fragile stillness outside the kitchen door. And for a long second no one breathes, as if the entire building is waiting to see which truth the night will choose to carry forward. The captain's order to hold service settles over the staff like a tide finally turning, and what could have broken instead becomes a strange, cautious calm. The injured server leans his tray gently against a linen-draped table, his wrist tucked close to his chest, and in the silence that follows, there is no accusation, no blame, only relief so quiet it feels like a prayer. The planner stands at the center of it all, her eyes wide, her certainty splintered into something raw and honest. For the first time all evening, she has nothing rehearsed to say. 6:30. The band softens its tempo, easing the room into a warm instrumental bridge as the bride and groom take their first few steps beneath the chandelier's glow. The photographer drifts toward the outer corridor, drawn by the gravity of something he doesn't yet understand, his camera lowered but ready, as if instinct knows history is being written in a place the guests will never see. The sous chef clears his throat, voice steady, professional, without a trace of defensiveness. "We need 10 minutes to reset," he says, not asking permission, not pleading, simply speaking the truth as a craftsman who refuses to disguise harm as excellence. "If we rush this now, we risk injury, and we serve a plate we cannot stand behind." The planner swallows hard, and her gaze flickers across the staff, to the busser whose hands finally stop shaking, to the trainee near the water station who looks like she might cry from relief, to the injured server whose breath comes easier now that his pain has been allowed to exist in the open. It is not mutiny she sees. It is devotion that will no longer sacrifice itself. She turns and finds Elaine standing there, not gloating, not triumphant, simply present with the kind of quiet authority that does not need title or announcement to feel real. Their eyes meet. It is not a confrontation. It is a reckoning. "Who are you?" the planner asks, but the question is softer this time, stripped of suspicion, shaped instead by something like humility. Before Elaine can respond, the ballroom doors ease open, and the groom steps into the corridor, his tuxedo catching the low light in muted silver lines. He looks older in this space than he did on the dance floor, older not in years, but in memory. His eyes widen when they find Elaine, and for a moment every sound in the world seems to fall away. "Dr. Carter," he breathes, and the word lands not as a formality, but as gratitude spoken aloud at last. The planner blinks, startled. The sous chef straightens. The staff shift as one, like a room turning toward the source of a story that has been traveling through them for years without a face. The groom steps closer and, without hesitation, bows his head in a gesture that has nothing to do with hierarchy and everything to do with reverence. "I hoped you'd come," he says, voice thick with emotion he doesn't bother to hide. "I wasn't sure you would." Elaine smiles, soft and steady. "You asked that no one make a fuss," she replies gently, and a small, rueful laugh escapes him. "You always remembered what I meant instead of what I said." The planner stares, confusion meeting realization like two halves of a truth finally aligning. "You know each other?" she asks faintly. The groom nods, then turns not to the guests, not to the photographer, but to the staff gathered in that narrow corridor, the people who have held this night together with invisible hands. "I do," he says, and his voice shifts, not louder, not grander, only clearer, like a bell rung for the right reason. "Years ago, I was one of you." A murmur travels through the servers, not of gossip, but of recognition. He continues quietly. "I worked across this city in kitchens, and banquet halls and hotels, moving faster than I could think, carrying more than my body could hold. I dropped plates. I made mistakes. I hid injuries because I thought pain meant weakness." His eyes find Elaine again, and the memory lives in his breath. "Then there was a night when everything nearly collapsed, and instead of shouting, instead of humiliating anyone, she walked us through it. She didn't rescue us. She taught us how to protect each other." The sous chef lowers his head. The trainee covers her mouth with her hand. The planner's shoulders drop, her armor slipping to the floor of its own accord. "Dr. Carter designed the rotation most of you still use," the groom says softly. "She created the safety protocols your manuals quote without attribution, the breathing drills, the curved service paths, the rule that no plate is worth a person." The words ripple through the corridor like light touching water. Someone whispers, "Carter rotation," as if saying a pilgrimage aloud. The injured server's eyes glisten. "I didn't know," the planner murmurs, voice breaking on the admission. "I didn't know any of this." Elaine shakes her head gently. "You weren't meant to," she says, not unkindly. "The work was never about me." The groom glances toward the ballroom, where the bride waits at the center of the floor, watching him with a trust that steadies him where he stands. Then he turns back to the staff, his voice growing steadier, not because it grows louder, but because it grows truer. "Service is paused," he announces, not as a command, but as a promise. "We will wait. My wedding will not be built on someone else's pain." There is no applause, Not yet. Only a silence so full it feels like a blessing. The planner exhales, tears brightening her eyes in a way she does not try to hide. I was protecting the schedule, she says quietly, as if confessing to herself more than to anyone else. And I forgot to protect the people. Elaine's gaze softens. Schedules can recover, she says. Bodies cannot. The sous chef nods, relief and resolve threading through his voice. 10 minutes, he repeats. We reset safely. We serve with dignity, or not at all. The captain places a gentle hand on the injured server's shoulder and guides him to a chair, where another staff member brings ice, not as a formality, but as respect. No one rushes him. No one minimizes what happened. For the first time all evening, care is visible. The photographer lifts his camera, not predatory, not intrusive, and lowers it again, understanding instinctively that some forms of justice do not belong to lenses. They belong to memory. 6:36. The band holds the bridge gracefully. The bride rests her hands over her heart, eyes glistening as she watches the man she loves choose compassion over perfection. The planner steps forward, voice trembling. I owe you an apology, she says to the staff, to the injured server, to the captain, to the sous chef, then, finally, to Elaine. I mistook control for competence. I mistook silence for success. Elaine nods, accepting not triumph, but growth. Mistakes become harm only when we insist on keeping them, she says softly. Tonight you didn't. The planner inhales, then turns to the crew with a steadiness that comes not from pride, but from accountability. From this moment on, she says, we serve people before plates, and when we train again, her name will be on the page. The staff straighten, not out of obedience, but out of honor. The groom offers a small bow of gratitude toward Elaine, a gesture mirrored, quietly, shyly, by others around him. No spotlight shines. No announcement echoes through the ballroom. Yet justice arrives all the same. Not as punishment, not as humiliation, but as evidence, recognition, and a promise spoken into the bones of a room that will never move through a night like this, the same way, again. The clock shifts to 6:40. The compressor hum stabilizes. The sous chef begins the reset with patient precision. The staff breathe together, and as the world gently resumes its rhythm, it does so under a new rule the night has made unbreakable. No celebration is worthy if it demands someone disappear to hold it up. By the time the first plates leave the kitchen again, the room no longer feels like a stage fighting to hide its fractures, but something slower and more human, as if the night has learned how to breathe in its own skin. The guests never know exactly why the timing shifted, only that the courses arrive warmer somehow, steadier somehow, carried by hands that are no longer braced against harm, but supported by one another in a rhythm that feels less like performance and more like care. 6:52. The couple stands at the center of the dance floor, laughter catching in their throats when they notice the way the staff move now. Not hurried or hollow, but grounded, each step deliberate, each exchange wordless and dignified. The planner lingers near the corridor, no longer guarding the threshold like a gate, but remaining there out of choice, out of responsibility, quietly helping where she can, lifting a glass from a corner so a server won't have to twist around it, steadying a tray in passing because she finally understands the cost of not noticing. When the injured server returns, not to lift, not to prove himself, but simply to sit for a while at the edges of the motion, allowed to exist without disappearing, the captain places a folded linen over the chair back like a small banner of respect. The groom crosses the room between dances and kneels beside him for a moment, not making a spectacle of the gesture, not speaking loudly enough for anyone else to hear, only saying thank you, in a way that sounds like apology and gratitude braided into one breath. The server nods, eyes shining, his voice barely more than a whisper. I didn't think I was allowed to say I was hurt. You are now, the groom replies, and the promise sits between them like a light. The band leans into a mellow jazz number that wraps itself around the room, and the photographer, who has witnessed the quiet transformation of the evening, takes one photo from a respectful distance, not of spilled plates or panic or spectacle, but of a moment few people would think to preserve. The staff standing together in a narrow hallway, 3 of them laughing softly, the sous chef resting his hand on the captain's shoulder, the planner wiping her eyes with the back of her wrist as Elaine stands a few feet away, her smile more like a benediction than a victory. Later, as dessert approaches and the night finds its gentler edges, the groom takes the microphone, not during a toast, not in a way that interrupts celebration, but in a quiet window between songs when the room feels open and listening. He doesn't mention crisis or injury or delay. He doesn't point to blame. Instead, he speaks of gratitude, of unseen work, of the people who make beauty possible without asking to be thanked, and the guests applaud. Not polite applause, not obligatory applause, but something warmer, rounder, more honest. The kind that recognizes everyone in the room has just learned something they will carry home without knowing how to name it. Then he turns gently toward the staff. "From this year forward," he says, "this restaurant and our family will sponsor a fellowship in Dr. Carter's name, training, safety certification, and paid mentorship for young workers entering this industry, because excellence does not begin on the plate. It begins with how we treat the people who serve us." A hush descends, and for a heartbeat the world feels wider than the ballroom. The planner bows her head and nods, not as a gesture of ceremony, but as commitment. The sous chef closes his eyes like a man who has been waiting years to hear someone say out loud what he has believed silently all along. A server at the water station presses her lips together and breathes the way she was taught. Slowly, evenly, as if grounding herself into a future that suddenly feels less hostile. Elaine listens with a stillness that holds more than pride. It holds memory. Of every night she walked home alone through quiet streets after closing. Of every student whose hands shook on their first day. Of every kitchen where she tried to plant seeds that might not bloom until long after she was gone. When the applause softens, the planner approaches her, no performance left in the way she carries herself. "I will do better," she says simply, the words small but immense. Not because tonight went wrong, but because tonight finally told the truth. Elaine nods, and the moment asks for nothing else. She doesn't lecture or comfort or turn the moment into a lesson. She only answers, "Then this evening has already done its work." The night continues, not untouched, but transformed, and by the time the final dance draws to its tender close, the ballroom has gathered itself into a softer shape, like fabric that has relaxed after tension. Staff move in gentle patterns, sharing looks that say, "I see you, I am with you, I will not let you disappear." The captain collects name tags from tired pockets and promises to email new training notes not from obligation, but from reverence. The injured server leaves with an ice pack wrapped carefully in linen and a card with the groom's number inside. Not a gesture of power, but of accountability that will last beyond this room. Near the back doors, the planner posts a handwritten announcement for the next staff meeting. Not about metrics, not about sales, but about care. At the top of which she has written, for the first time, the origin of the words they have been using all along: Carter rotation, foundational safety, and dignity principles. Elaine remembers her father again, his voice threading through the quiet, the way he used to say that real progress doesn't shout. It leaves the world slightly kinder than it was before. She slips her coat over her shoulders and walks through the edge of the ballroom unnoticed at first, as she prefers, until the groom catches her at the doorway and bows his head one last time. Not as ritual, but as farewell. "You didn't have to come," he says softly. "I didn't," she replies, "but I wanted to see who you'd become." He smiles, and she knows the answer without him saying a word. Outside, the city breathes under a velvet sky, streetlights scattering gold across rain-dark pavement, and Elaine pauses on the threshold of the restaurant, hearing the faint echo of music behind her, a chorus of plates and voices and footsteps woven into something gentler now. She understands that her work will always live in moments like this, not in titles, not in applause, but in the way a room learns finally to hold both beauty and truth at the same time. And as she steps into the night, the quiet lingers like a promise that dignity, once seen, does not vanish. It changes the shape of every room it has ever touched.